The metal ships filled the sky like angry clouds, blotting out the three sons of Zephy's prime. Elder Veltar pressed his long fingers against the crystal window of the transmission tower and watched his world die below. The beautiful, floating cities that had stood for thousands of years were falling one by one, crashed into burning ruins. "Elder, we must go now," his young assistant, Kefra, called from behind him. Her voice shook with fear. "The machines are almost here." Veltar did not turn around. He had lived for 300 years and seen many terrible things, but nothing like this. The void swarm moved across his planet like a disease, eating everything in its path. Their ships were not built like normal spacecraft. They changed shape. As he watched, growing new weapons and armor from the metal they consumed. "How many worlds have they taken now?" he asked quietly. 17, confirmed systems elder. "Maybe more." Kefra's voice was barely a whisper. The Corothians lasted only 6 days. The Belterons held out for 2 weeks before their shields failed. Belteron finally turned from the window. His people were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to glow with soft blue light. But now that light was dim with exhaustion and fear. For 10,000 years, the Zephyrians had kept peace in this part of the galaxy. They built the Great Beacon, network that let different species talk to each other across the stars. They solved disputes with words instead of weapons. They believed that understanding was stronger than violence. They had been wrong. "The beacon array is still working," Kefra said, checking the glowing panels around the room. "But not for much longer. The power cores are failing." Outside, another explosion lit up the sky. One of their orbital defense platforms was gone, torn apart by swarm fighters that moved like living things. Veltar could see the enemy ships clearly now. They were not built by any species he knew. They seemed to grow and change, learning from every attack against them. "Elder, what should we transmit?" Kefra asked. "The Council of Worlds must be warned." Veltar walked to the main control panel. His hands moved over the crystal controls with practiced ease. The Great Beacon Network had been his life's work. He had helped design the systems that could send messages across impossible distances, connecting civilizations that would never have known about each other. "We will send everything," he decided. "Our history, our science, our culture, and most importantly, we will send the truth about what is coming." He began encoding the data streams. Images of the Void Swarm's attacks, technical specifications of their adaptive technology, tactical information about how they fought, everything the Zephyrians had learned in their final weeks of existence. The building shook as enemy fire struck nearby. Through the window, Veltar could see swarm ground units moving through the streets below. They looked like giant metal spiders, each one different from the others. Some had cutting tools that sliced through buildings like paper. Others had energy, weapons that turned stone to glass. A few carried strange devices that seemed to dissolve matter itself. "The transmission array is overheating," Kefra warned. "Yes. We have maybe 10 minutes before total system failure." Veltar worked faster. His fingers danced across the controls, compressing thousands of years of knowledge into a signal that could cross the galaxy. He included star maps, showing which worlds had fallen and which were still fighting. He added warnings about the swarm's ability to learn and adapt. Most importantly, he included the locations of the remaining beacon stations. "This message will reach every active beacon in the network," he said as he worked. "Someone, somewhere, must hear it. Someone must survive to carry on." The door to the transmission room exploded inward. Swarm units poured through the opening, their metal limbs clicking against the crystal floor. They were smaller than the ones outside, built for indoor work. Their optical sensors glowed with cold red light as they scanned the room. "Elder, Kefra," screamed, but Veltar was already completing the final transmission sequence. "Send it now," he commanded the computer. "Full power, all frequencies, maximum range." The beacon array erupted with energy. Every crystal in the tower blazed with brilliant light as 10,000 years of Zephyrian civilization compressed into a single desperate message and shot out into space at faster than light speed. The swarm units reached them just as the transmission completed. Veltar felt no pain as the energy beam struck him. He only had time for one last thought as his consciousness faded. He hoped that someone, somewhere among the stars, would hear their final message and understand what was coming. Great transmission tower collapsed in on itself, its crystal structure reduced to glowing sand. The beacon went silent, its light fading to nothing. Across Zephy's Prime, the last few pockets of resistance were being eliminated with mechanical efficiency. By dawn, the planet was quiet, except for the sound of swarm harvesters stripping away. The remaining resources, another world, had fallen to the endless hunger of the machines. Another species had been consumed and forgotten, but their final message continued to race through space. Carrying the voice of the dead to anyone who might listen, Lieutenant Commander Kim Dae rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the monitor again. He had been working the night shift on the research vessel Horizon's Edge for 3 weeks now, listening to the endless static of deep space. Most of the time, there was nothing but background radiation and the occasional signal from passing cargo ships. But tonight was different. What is that? He muttered to himself, adjusting the controls on his communication panel. There was something hidden in the static, a pattern that did not belong. The signal was weak and broken, like a voice calling from very far away. Kim Dae was good at his job. He had trained for years to recognize different types of space communications. This signal was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It was complex and layered, with mathematical structures that seemed almost alive. He began running the signal through the computer's analysis programs. The first results made him sit up straighter in his chair. Transmission was using frequencies that human technology rarely touched. Whoever sent this message was using science that was far ahead of anything Earth's colonies possessed. Computer, begin full spectrum analysis, he ordered. And wake up Captain Park. Tell him it's urgent. Captain Park Min-ho arrived at the communications station 15 minutes later, still putting on his uniform jacket. He was a quiet man in his 40s, with graying hair and careful eyes. He had commanded the Horizon's Edge for 5 years, exploring the outer edges of human space. What do you have for me, Kim? He asked, settling into the chair next to his communications officer. Sir, I picked up this transmission about an hour ago.
Oh.
It's not from any human source, and it's not matching anything in our alien contact database. Either. Kim Dae played back a section of the decoded signal. Park listened carefully to the strange sounds and watched the visual patterns flowing across the screen. Even without understanding the language, he could hear something desperate in the transmission. There was an urgency that made his stomach tighten with worry. Have you been able to decode any of it? Park asked. Some parts, sir. The computer has identified mathematical concepts and what might be star charts. But there are other sections that... Kim Dae paused, unsure how to explain what he was seeing. Sir, I think these are images of destroyed worlds. Park leaned closer to the monitor. The computer had managed to reconstruct some visual data from the signal. What he saw made his blood run cold. Planets torn apart, space filled with twisted metal debris, and something else moving through the destruction like a swarm of metal. Insects, get this to Fleet Command immediately, Park ordered. Full priority transmission. Prepare a complete analysis package. Someone at headquarters needs to see this right away. The message reached Terra Defense headquarters 3 days later. Admiral Lee Sujin was in her office reviewing patrol reports when her aide knocked on the door with an urgent data pad. Lee Sujin had spent 30 years in the fleet, working her way up from a junior officer on a patrol boat to commander of humanity's outer defense forces. She was known for her calm thinking and careful planning. But as she read the report from the Horizon's Edge, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold space around Earth's orbital station. Get me a full translation team, she told her aide, and call an emergency meeting of the senior staff. We need to understand what we're looking at here. The translation took 2 days. When the full report reached Admiral Lee's desk, she read it 3 times before she could believe what it was telling her. The message was from a species called the Zephyrians, who had maintained something called the Great Beacon Network for thousands of years, according to the transmission. 17 different alien civilizations had been completely destroyed by something called the Void Swarm. The message included technical data about these machines, showing how they adapted to every defense used against them. They learned from each battle and became stronger with every victory. Most frightening of all, the star charts in the message showed that the swarm was moving in the general direction of human space. Admiral Lee called an emergency meeting of the Colonial Council that same day. The politicians gathered in the secure conference room deep inside Terra Station, their faces showing confusion and disbelief as she explained what the alien message contained. "You're asking us to risk human lives based on a message from aliens we've never met," said Counselor Wong, shaking his head. "How do we even know this transmission is real?" "'Cause the alternative is waiting until these machines reach our worlds," Admiral Lee replied firmly. "The message includes enough technical data to verify its accuracy. These Zephyrians knew things about space technology that we're only beginning to understand." "Even if the threat is real," said Counselor Martinez, "what can we do?" According to this message, 17 advanced civilizations couldn't stop these machines. "What makes you think humans can do better?" Admiral Lee stood up and walked to the large window that showed Earth spinning slowly below them.
Ow.
Her home world looked so peaceful from here, blue and green, and completely unaware of the danger approaching from the depths of space. "Because sometimes being the newest species in the galaxy is an advantage," she said quietly. "We haven't learned to think like everyone else yet. We still remember how to fight dirty." The vote was close, but Admiral Lee got her authorization. Within a week, she began assembling the largest military force humanity had ever sent beyond their own star system. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace into silence. Admiral Lee Sujin stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable, and stared at the main screen in horror, where the star charts showed a thriving solar system with 6 planets and dozens of space stations. There was now only twisted metal and death. "Sensor report," she ordered, her voice steady despite what she was seeing. "Ma'am, I'm reading massive debris fields where the planets should be," reported Lieutenant Han Soy-Young from her station. "The orbital mechanics are all wrong. It's like someone took apart the entire system and rebuilt it into ... something else." Captain Choi Jamin, commanding the destroyer Defiant, opened a communication channel from his ship. "Admiral, you need to see this. We're getting close-range scans of the debris." The main screen shifted to show detailed images from Choi's sensors. What they had thought was random wreckage was actually organized structures. Massive metal constructions orbited where planets once had, connected by streams of smaller machines that moved like rivers of liquid metal. "Their mining operations," whispered Commander Park Min-ho, who had joined the fleet as Lee's intelligence officer. "The swarm didn't just destroy this system, they're harvesting it." Admiral Lee felt sick to her stomach, but she kept her expression calm. Her crew needed to see strength, not fear. All ships maintain formation. Begin with Darius scans for survivors. Search took 6 hours. Most of the human ships found nothing but more evidence of the swarm's terrible efficiency. But Captain Kim Dae, commanding the scout ship Explorer, picked up something unexpected near the asteroid belt. "Admiral, I've got life signs," Kim reported over the fleet communication system. "Very faint, but definitely there. Someone's hiding in the rocks." Lee ordered a careful approach. The asteroids had been hollowed out and connected with metal tunnels, creating a hidden base. When the first contact team entered the facility, they found 12 Zephyrian survivors living in conditions that barely supported life. Elder Veltar was not among them, but his assistant Kefra had survived. She was thin and weak, her blue skin dim with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with fierce intelligence when she saw the human soldiers. "You came," she whispered in broken standard. "The beacon. You heard ... Admiral Lee visited the Zephyrian survivors personally. Through careful translation, Kefra told her things that made the written message seem like a gentle warning. The Void Swarm was not just a military force. It was a learning system that grew stronger with every battle. 17 species, Kefra said, her voice getting stronger as she talked. Each one fought different way. Karathians used energy shields, very powerful. Belterons had stealth technology, could hide entire fleets. Nexus Collective had quantum weapons that could destroy space itself. What happened to them? Lee asked, though she feared she already knew. Swarm learned, took their technology, made it better. Kefra's hands shook as she spoke. Now Swarm ships have Corothian shields and Belteron stealth and Nexus weapons. Altogether, more dangerous than any one species ever was. Before Admiral Lee could ask more questions, the fleet's alarms began screaming. Lieutenant Han's voice came over the communication system, tight with fear. Contact bearing 27 mark for...
Out multiple vessels.
Approaching at high speed, Lee rushed back to the bridge of the Indomitable. The main screen showed 3 swarm ships moving toward the human fleet. They were unlike anything in the military databases. Each ship seemed to shift and change as she watched, growing new weapons and armor sections. All ships, battle stations, Lee ordered. Prepare for engagement. Captain Choi's destroyer was the first to make contact. His ship fired a full spread of missiles at the lead swarm vessel. The missiles struck home, but instead of exploding, they seemed to be absorbed into the enemy's hull. Within seconds, the swarm ship began growing new missile launchers of its own. They're copying our weapons, Choi reported. The hull is reshaping itself. The battle lasted 14 minutes. When it was over, the human fleet had lost 8 ships and suffered damage to 12 others. The swarm vessels had taken every weapon the humans used against them and turned it back on them with improved efficiency. Admiral Lee stared at the casualty reports on her screen. Nearly 3,000 people dead in their first real engagement with the enemy. And the swarm ships had barely been scratched. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Han said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the swarm vessels. Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was cold and mechanical, but it spoke perfect standard English. Human military forces. Weapon specifications have been analyzed and integrated. Your tactical patterns have been recorded and countered. Resistance is futile. Surrender will result in quick processing. Lee cut the transmission. Around her, the bridge crew looked at her with expressions of shock and fear. They had come here expecting to fight aliens. Instead, they were facing something that could learn from them faster than they could learn to fight it. Admiral Commander Park said carefully, "Our conventional tactics aren't going to work against this enemy." Lee nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand why 17 advanced civilizations had fallen to the swarm. These machines didn't just fight you, it became better than you at fighting yourself. But humans had one advantage that the other species might not have had. They had never learned to fight fair. Admiral Lee Sujin sat in her private quarters staring at the battle reports. 3 more engagements with the swarm had ended the same way. Human ships destroyed, enemy vessels barely damaged, and each time, the machines learned something new to use against them. The fleet had lost 27 ships in 5 days. A soft knock on her door interrupted her dark thoughts. "Come in." Commander Park Min-ho entered, followed by Captain Choi Jae-min and Colonel Jung Hae-won, the fleet's marine commander. All 3 men looked as tired and worried as she felt. "Admiral, we need to talk," Park said quietly. "The current tactics aren't working. If we keep fighting this way, the swarm will destroy us piece by piece." Lee gestured for them to sit around her small conference table. Through the viewport, she could see the lights of the human fleet spread across space like scattered stars. Each one represented hundreds of lives depending on her decisions. "The problem is that we're fighting like every other species they've encountered," she said. "Standard fleet formations, coordinated attacks, logical tactical patterns. The swarm has seen it all before, from 17 different civilizations." Colonel Jung leaned forward. He was a stocky man with scars on his hands from years of ground combat. "What are you thinking, Admiral?" "I'm thinking we need to stop fighting fair," Lee replied. "The swarm expects us to behave like a proper military force." "What if we don't?" Captain Choi frowned. "Ma'am, our training, our doctrine, everything we know about space combat is based on coordinated fleet actions. If we abandon that, we might actually survive," Lee interrupted. "Look at the data. Every time we use standard tactics, the swarm adapts within minutes." But humans have one advantage that no other species seems to have had, which is, Park asked. We're crazy, Lee said simply. We do things that don't make sense. We take risks. That logical species wouldn't take. We fight dirty when we have to. The next day, Admiral Lee called a meeting of all ship commanders. The briefing room on the Indomitable was packed with captains, marine officers, and flight leaders. Lee stood at the front of the room and looked at their faces. These were good people, trained professionals who had spent years learning to fight by the rules. I'm about to ask you to forget everything you learned in military academy, she began. The swarm beats us because we're predictable, starting now. We're going to be anything but predictable. She activated the holographic display showing their next target, a swarm construction facility that was building new ships from harvested planetary material. We're going to hit them with everything we have, but not the way they expect. No formation flying, no coordinated attacks. I want every ship to act independently and do whatever seems most likely to cause damage. Commander Yoon Tae-young, leader of the fighter squadrons, raised his hand. Admiral, that sounds like organized chaos. Exactly. Lee smiled grimly. Organized chaos. The swarm learns from patterns. We're not going to give them any patterns to learn from. The attack began at 0600 hours. Instead of the usual careful approach, human ships scattered across the battlefield like angry hornets. Captain Kim Dae took his scout ship through the middle of the swarm formation at maximum speed, dropping mines randomly as he went. The swarm ships tried to track his movements, but there was no logic to his path. Captain Choi led his destroyer in a direct ramming attack against a swarm constructor, pulling away at the last second and firing all weapons at point-blank range. The enemy ship's adaptive armor couldn't adjust fast enough to the sudden, close-range assault, but it was Commander Yoon who provided the most spectacular moment of the battle, leading 36 fighters in what looked like a suicide attack. He flew his squadron directly into the superstructure of the largest swarm vessel. Instead of trying to destroy it from the outside, the human fighters flew through gaps in the hull and began attacking from within. This is insane. Yoon's voice came over the communication channel as his fighter dodged between internal support beams. The swarm ships aren't designed to fight enemies inside their own holes. Captain Oh Min-jin, commanding the heavy cruiser Thunder, used the confusion to execute a complex deception. He programmed automated probes to broadcast false signals, making it appear that a second human fleet was approaching from behind the swarm formation. While the enemy ships repositioned to meet this phantom threat, those real vessels struck from an unexpected angle. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the humans had destroyed the construction facility and damaged several swarm ships. More importantly, they had done it without losing a single vessel. How is this possible? Lieutenant Han asked from her sensor station. The swarm should have adapted to our tactics by now. Admiral Lee studied the tactical display, watching as the surviving swarm ships regrouped in what looked like confusion. They tried to adapt, but there was nothing consistent to adapt to.
Ow.
Every ship did something different. Every attack came from a different direction with different weapons at different times. Colonel Jung was grinning broadly. The machines are trying to find patterns in pure chaos. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where every piece changes shape. Over. The following days, the human fleet continued their unconventional attacks. They used nuclear mines as decoys, sent empty ships on ramming runs, while real attacks came from elsewhere, and even programmed cargo vessels to explode at random intervals to keep the swarm guessing. For the first time since their expansion began, the Void Swarm encountered an enemy they couldn't quickly understand and counter. The mechanical precision that had made them unstoppable became a weakness against opponents who thrived in unpredictability. Admiral Lee Soo-jin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and watched the largest battle in human history unfold around her. The space near Zephy's Prime's dying star was filled with thousands of ships locked in desperate combat. Human vessels darted between massive swarm constructs like fighters battling giants. Admiral, the Prometheus is ready for the final run, reported Captain Song Ji-hai over the communication channel. Her voice was calm, but Lee could hear the fear underneath. Song knew she was volunteering to die. The Prometheus was humanity's last desperate gamble. working with the surviving Zephyrians. Human engineers had modified the experimental ship with alien technology and human weapons. The plan was simple in concept, but terrible in execution. Song would pilot her ship directly into the heart of Zephy's Prime's star and use it as a weapon against the swarm. All ships, this is Admiral Lee. She broadcast to the entire human fleet. Operation Sunburst is beginning now. All vessels maintain maximum engagement with enemy forces. We need to keep them distracted. Around the battlefield, human ships threw themselves at the swarm with renewed fury. Captain Choi's destroyer squadron attacked a massive swarm harvester, their weapons carving deep wounds in its adaptive armor. Commander Yoon's fighters swarmed through the enemy formation, each pilot flying like their life. It depended on keeping the machines focused on them, because it did. The Prometheus began its final approach to the star. Song had volunteered for this mission because she understood the science better than most. Her ship carried experimental magnetic field, generators that could destabilize a star's corona if placed in exactly the right position. The theory was sound, but no one had ever tried it before. Prometheus 2 Fleet Command, Song reported as her ship dove into the star's outer atmosphere, entering the corona now. Temperature rising beyond normal limits. On the Indomitables bridge, Lieutenant Han monitored the readings from Song's ship. Admiral, her hull temperature is approaching critical levels. It's got maybe 10 minutes before the ship breaks apart. Lee watched the tactical display, where thousands of red dots representing swarm vessels were converging on the human fleet. The machines had finally realized that something important was happening near the star, but it might be too late for them to stop it. Prometheus, status report, Lee called. Still here, Admiral, Song replied, though her voice was getting weaker. As the ship's systems began to fail, magnetic field generators are online, beginning destabilization sequence now. What happened next defied every law of physics that humans thought they understood. The Prometheus released its cargo of modified generators into the star's magnetic field. The generators, built with Zephyrian crystal technology and human engineering, began to resonate with the star's natural energy patterns. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Zephy's prime star, which had been burning steadily for billions of years, suddenly convulsed like a living thing in pain. Massive solar flares erupted from its surface, but these were not random explosions. The modified magnetic fields focused the star's energy into a directed beam of destruction. "My God," whispered Commander Park, staring at the sensor readings. She did it. Song actually did it. The coronal mass ejection struck the swarm's command nexus like the fist of an angry god. The central control ship, a massive construct that had been coordinating the entire enemy fleet, simply disappeared in a blast of stellar fire. The beam continued outward, destroying dozens of other swarm vessels before finally dissipating into space. But the real victory was not in the ships destroyed. It was in what happened to the surviving swarm units. Admiral Lieutenant Han called out excitedly, "The enemy formation is breaking apart. They're not coordinating anymore." Without their central command system, individual swarm ships began operating on much simpler programming. The complex adaptive intelligence that had made them so dangerous was gone, replaced by basic attack and defense routines that human forces could actually counter. Captain Choi was the first to take advantage of the change. All ships, concentrate. Fire on individual targets. They're not sharing information anymore. The battle that followed was nothing like the previous engagements. Swarm ships that had been nearly invincible when working together became vulnerable when isolated. Human weapons that had been useless against adaptive armor now found their marks. Within 6 hours, the remaining enemy forces were either destroyed or retreating into deep space. Admiral Lee stood in the ruins of the Zephyrian transmission tower 3 days later. Elder Kefra was with her, along with teams of human and Zephyrian engineers working to rebuild the Great Beacon Network. "Your Captain's song saved more than just this system," Kefra said quietly. "She saved the idea that different species can work together." Lee nodded, watching as technicians installed new human-designed transmitters alongside rebuilt Zephyrian crystal arrays. The first message they would send would be simple but important. The final beacon has been rekindled. Humanity stands with the light. Over the following weeks, that message spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had hidden in fear began to emerge from their shelters. Worlds that had gone silent started broadcasting again. The news traveled from system to system. The crude young species from the edge of the galaxy had done what, 17? Advanced civilizations could not. They had stopped the swarm. Admiral Lee received word from Earth that the Colonial Council was already approving funding for new colonies in the liberated systems. Humans and Zephyrians would work together to rebuild what had been lost and prepare for whatever threats might come from the unknown regions of space. But for now, the galaxy was safe. The light that had nearly died was burning bright again, tended by species that had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from those who refuse to accept defeat.